This is my 1986 Pontiac Trans Am. Anybody who is a frequent viewer or subscriber to the channel knows we are in the middle of a Gen 5 L83 swap. And up until this point, I did have some problems. The motor doesn't want to fit where I want it, and all that pretty much comes down to the cross member and motor mount setup that I'm using. So basically the issue that we're running into here is I installed an LS swap to the cross member that a viewer sent me. Now I figured I could just go out and get an LT motor mount made for like a 4th gen Camaro or a car that has an LS in it and bolt it in to this cross member, being that does accept an LS mount. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. It's not going to work. The big problem is this is an LS swap cross member. This is an LT motor. Nobody makes a motor mount that's gonna bolt onto an LT and accept a LS swap bracket in a 3rd gen car. The mounts that I do have in here right now are the Holley ones that I did mention in the last video that I ordered, and they are made for a 4th gen Camaro. So even though the engine is sitting lower now and it's not hitting the firewall anymore, it's still way too far back. The bell housing doesn't clear and it's still sitting way higher than it should be. So unfortunately, due to this issue with running this cross member, that only means one thing. So what I have here is the solution to all my problems, at least I hope. This is an ICT billet conversion plate specifically made for a 3rd gen Camaro or Firebird with an LT Gen 5 swap and the factory crossmember and motor mounts. So basically this is going to bolt directly to the LT motor. With this installed, it's going to allow us to bolt the factory small block Chevy motor mount clamshell to that. And this entire assembly is very simply just gonna sit over the factory motor mounts and everything should be fine and dandy. All right guys, so this is exciting. Essentially, the motor is mounted in the stock cross member. Now, I really thought I was gonna have to cut some stuff, notch some things, because if you do an LS swap with the factory cross member, there is some notching that needs to be done for the AC, and in my case, in my Camaro, I notched the oil pan as well because I wanted the little extra clearance to drop the motor in. Now, with the ICT billet plates, the factory clamshell that came off of the Trans Am's original motor that I had sitting under the workbench, I'm glad I didn't sell that thing or remove these mounts to sell, because turns out I actually needed them. And basically that's just bolted to the factory motor mount that I didn't remove or touch. Now I wanted to do it this way just to get the positioning right, so I don't have to keep putting the motor in and out, in and out. Now these motor mounts are gonna get changed. I'm gonna open them up and put poly inserts in there. And granted, you know, it's suspended from the K member, so there's gonna be a little more space here than when it's actually has the weight of the engine on the motor mounts. But with the poly mounts, that'll make sure nothing moves too much. There's plenty of clearance down here around the oil pan. And basically what we're gonna do is just disconnect this, put the cross member back in, take the tubular one out, and we're gonna drop this down in the exact same position the mounts are, and we're gonna have to see exactly where the bell housing flange is gonna fold. And just to show you exactly why this position is either gonna make or break the install is because this is as far forward I can put it and still clear the AC compressor. Basically that'll mount there. And I did call up ICT Billet, and they said once the motor's in position, if I'm not using this piece here, I could just trim this off, and that's gonna actually allow me to fit the compressor in. All right, so this is the transmission that's gonna make its way into the Trans Am. I know in a previous video I did say I was gonna put a built 4L70E in there, and I actually picked one up and it's still sitting under the car. But basically plans changed. Last minute I picked up this 6L80E, came out of a newer, I think it was like a 2012, 2013 Tahoe. It's a rear wheel drive transmission. And yeah, this thing is gonna be going in the Trans Am. Basically what changed my mind was that a couple of you guys messaged me as well as commented on my previous videos. One guy in particular actually put this transmission in his 3rd gen. He didn't have to cut the tunnel, and he was actually able to use a Hawks 4L60E swap crossmember. Everything literally just like bolted right up. For one thing being it's a 6-speed, obviously it's gonna get better gas mileage. The other thing is the first gear in this transmission is an absolute friggin' neck snapper. So being the car is going to be NA for a while, and it's going to be stock probably, you know, 350, 400 horsepower, you know, at the engine once the tune is done. Obviously, this thing came in the SS 5th gen Camaros, and just by throwing a few things at this, it's going to be able to hold on to what I'm going to do to the car. But all that's left now is to basically just slide it into the car. We're going to bolt it up to the L83, hoist it up, and see where it's going to fall. All right, so as you can see, the transmission is roughly into place. Very, very easy to get this into place when it doesn't weigh like freaking 250 pounds, but everything fits pretty good. There's absolutely no issues with the front of the bell housing and the front of the tunnel. A couple of spots I am gonna address though. For one thing, there's a nut that holds the fuel lines up, or you know, secures them to the center of the tunnel. I'm gonna remove that because it's contacting the top of the transmission. Then towards the back, there's a little spot where this kind of raised rib on the back of the transmission is contacting the top of the tunnel as well. So I'm gonna remove the nut for the fuel lines. I'm gonna ding the top of the tunnel up a little bit with a hammer, and then I'm gonna pull the whole transmission out again, and we're going to just shave down the top of that rib, and then that should give us enough room to get this up high enough. As for drivetrain or driveline angle, which is very important, I'm gonna do a very rough measurement of this and then raise the transmission accordingly. Now, being I am just trying to get the angle of the engine and transmission alone, you wanna make sure the car is level. If it's not level, this number is gonna be meaningless. So normally, if we were getting a pinion angle, which isn't to be confused with what I'm doing here, pinion angle is gonna be the measurement on the diff, the drive shaft, and the engine. Those 3 numbers are compared to each other. So it doesn't matter if the car is level or not. You're just trying to get a measurement of those 3 points to see, you know, if your U-joints are gonna explode or not. So I already did make sure that the car is level when I put it up on jack stands. I double checked, I measured both fenders. The numbers match up. Now, all I'm gonna do here is stick this right on the crank. Once we're done clearancing the tunnel and shaving that top of the case down on the transmission, I'm just going to jack it up and clearance accordingly until I get that number to around 2 degrees. I'm probably gonna aim for. right, so with a little bit of trimming on the transmission side of things, a little bit of dinging on the tunnel, I think I'm where I want to be. I measured this in a few spots just because the crank pulley, it's not perfectly flat. The rubber kind of protrudes out a little bit, but I got it on there as flat as I can. You can see we have a reading of 2.85 degrees, and I pulled the intake off just to kind of get a few more measurements. The GDI pump seems to be a very flat machine surface, and popping that on there, it's pretty much the exact same measurement, and I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm gonna leave the angle basically where it is, and if you come underneath, it's by no means like jammed up into the tunnel. There is some space. You see, we got a little bit of wiggle room. So nothing's touching anywhere. And when I pull this down and do the final install, I'm probably gonna clear it a little bit more, ding this side out a little bit over here, as well as a little bit just down the top. The biggest, or the closest spot is right there by the fuel lines where the that protrusion in the case to hold it into a C-clamp, it's actually rubbing on the fuel line right there. And I am probably gonna get rid of those and run the fuel line somewhere else, so that's not gonna be an issue. I'm gonna swap the pan out probably for a 5th gen Camaro pan, being it will be a little bit shorter and not as short as a G8 pan, so it can still, keep a good amount of fluid in there. And I think that's gonna be absolutely fine. I have no plans on dropping this thing down, so with the slightly shorter pan, that's gonna be ready to roll. I mean, look at that, it's not that much lower than the lowest point of the cross member. And with the other pan, I think it's probably gonna be around the same spot. And on that note, I think that wraps up another Trans Am video. I'm really happy the engine mock-up stuff's kind of done. I've been really bored with just this messing around with motor mounts, pulling it out, getting something to work, putting it back in. I really want to get moving on this thing, get to the exciting stuff like the wiring, the fuel system, actually getting closer to getting it, started up. And having the engine in its final position, having everything clear, the air conditioning clear. I do have to modify the AC box a little. I think I'm gonna trim it just to make sure nothing comes in contact with any torque when the motor lifts up. But other than that, the fitment is pretty good. And once again, as far as this angle goes, I'm going to probably ding the tunnel a little bit more, and just so I have a little more insurance, get it up a tiny bit higher. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with the number we have now. And the 6L80 is technically in the car. Next video, I think we're gonna do the cleaning. I know I said we were gonna get onto the wiring, but I'm gonna pull this thing out. We're gonna clean all the corrosion off the engine. We're gonna put the oil pan on for good, get everything basically cleaned up, looking good in the engine bay as well. So we're going to basically Scotch-Brite, clean everything, spray the engine bay with base coat, clear coat. From there, we're gonna move on to the wiring for the gauges, modifying the stock harness, and I'm gonna reveal to you basically my plan for the engine control on this thing. But as usual, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you want to go check out more videos on my Trans Am and you are new to the channel, I'm going to put the link to my playlist down in the description. But once again, that is going to do it for this one. See you in a few days.